problem here. I mean, look, James Gunn, the writer and director, delivered an emotional, touching character study. And I can agree with those of you who are very big fans of this show, particularly coming off of season 1, that these are likable characters. And by the end of season 2, I have come to care about them as well. But in his capacity as the head of DC Studios, James Gunn promoted this as an event with major developments for the DCU. But perhaps what's even more alarming than Gunn not delivering on his grand promises is that he seems to think he did. That to me is even more alarming than not delivering. It's like, whoa, what? Is this like the big reveals that we can look forward to? I mean, in his latest round, and that's the problem when you're your own, not just producer, but executive. James Gunn has no oversight. I mean, supposedly Peter Safran's supposed to do it, but there's no one overseeing Gunn. Not just to tell him no, but also to have an objective perspective. You know, can Gunn look at this in hindsight? You know, hey, things happen. But if he can't look at it in hindsight and be like, might have overpromised, then we're in for a rough road ahead. In his latest round of interviews, and by the way, that's another problem. His interviews have already lost significant value because he'll do an interview with anybody. But also, now they've lost even more value in that he has established a track record of not delivering on what he's promised. Not just in one interview. Oh, I got carried away, I misspoke. But it's something that he repeated again and again and again, his promises for the end of Peacemaker Season 2. In fact, while many of you defended Episode 7 last week, we had ourselves a conversation. And I appreciate those of you who were like, Grace, you might have had some points. But most of you on that note, and I did a poll on Twitter, just to try to make sure I could read the room, because I'm not afraid to look the truth in the eye. It's an important skill, and one that I hope James Gunn has. But while some of you are still trying to remain positive, pretty much nobody could defend this season finale, particularly because of the way James Gunn had positioned it in his interviews. And it's actually, in fact, the series finale, because James Gunn has announced that there will be no season 3 of Peacemaker, which, by the way, I think is stupid. I think it very clearly sets up a season 3 of Peacemaker, and we're going to talk about that, although Gunn says this is not the end for these characters. So anyway, this morning, in his interviews, Gunn said that the Peacemaker Season 2 finale, he's like, I did introduce some amazing things for the DCU. That Rick Flag Sr. is continuing his partnership with Lex Luthor. He introduced the prison planet of Salvation, and he brings Checkmate from the comics to the DCU. So we're going to start this breakdown by going over these reveals, okay? But I'm going to discuss the emotional journey of the characters, because I do agree that from that perspective, the series finale was very effective. So what are your initial thoughts? We're going to have a discussion about it, but right now, what are you thinking? I was going to just ask you at the end, but I'll ask you up front as well here. Where's your confidence level right now in James Gunn on a 1 to 10? I'm sure that it's taken a hit for most of you after you've now seen the season or series finale of Peacemaker. But I'm wondering how much of a hit. I really still enjoyed Superman quite a bit, but I'm very concerned. I would say I'm probably at a 6 right now in my confidence for him. It's still above a 5, but I was at a 10 after Superman, to be honest with you. I liked it that much. But now I'm like, In fact, it seems like James Gunn has not changed at all. And, pluses and minuses. And I still don't know if he's the right choice to lead a cinematic universe. I still feel that is a job of a not just a producer, but a suit. I know a lot of people, particularly after what happened with DC under the previous executive regime, have really vilified suits. But a good suit is extremely valuable. So you just have to go find one. All right, so James Gunn. Oh, and by the way, I would also love it if you subscribed and hit the like button. Okay, so James Gunn also revealed this morning in his interviews that he had wanted Deadpool to appear for just a moment when they opened one of the doors when they were exploring the different universes, and that Ryan Reynolds had wanted to do it, but that it just didn't come together. You know what that reminds me of? When Zack Snyder was telling everybody that Ryan Reynolds wanted to do a Green Lantern cameo in the Snyder Cut, but that didn't happen. You know, I was actually a story that I had broken, and Zack Snyder eventually confirmed it. But you know what that sounds like to me? Ryan Reynolds just doesn't want to say no to these guys to their face. And so instead things just don't work out, right? I mean, I think if Ryan Reynolds wanted to really, truly wanted to do it, he would have done it. I mean, this is the guy who leaked the Deadpool footage, and he could use all the good publicity he could get right now. He can get after what's going on with his wife. So I'm sure he would have loved to have saved the Peacemaker season finale. You know, Gunn said that it was probably for the best that it didn't work out, because he didn't want, that would be all anyone would have talked about in the episode. And it's like, dude, it's your job as the writer, director, producer, and the head of DC to give us something better or as good to talk about. You know, like, we would only talk about Deadpool primarily if that was the only good thing in the episode, right? That's like saying in Deadpool and Wolverine, we're not going to bring Blade back because that's the only thing anyone's going to talk about. It's like, Ryan Reynolds gave us a heck of a lot of awesome stuff to discuss, and it was phenomenal. All right, so let's talk about what James Gunn did give us, right? So as is always the case with Gunn and these DC and Marvel streaming shows, is that we're stuck with the D-list. Like, this is a story that is screaming out for Lex Luthor and Amanda Waller. And they've both shown up briefly, but where are they? Like, why aren't they truly a part of this story? Why am I stuck with Luthor passing notes, seriously, notes to his staff, right? Who I suspect, and I know for sure some are, friends of Gunn's, FOGs, right? Like, I'm glad, I thought it was a very moving. I recently discussed that in my coverage of Peacemaker Season 2, that Gunn has come up with a lot of people and his career has worked out, but for a lot of them, it still hasn't. So he wants to help his friends. But it's becoming like, it's detracting from the professionalism of the work. And I think that's a real problem. And again, there's no one to say that to Gunn now. And what was with the montage, by the way, right? Doing hard drugs at work, and the song choice with the lyrics about doing something to the heart, right? I mean, you all heard it. How could you not? They repeated it just so much. Like, if your edginess induces eye rolling, that means it's actually cringe. Next, the prison planet Salvation. Apparently an idea actually dreamed up by Lex Luthor, but one that Rick Flag Sr. can really get behind as a way to punish his son's murderer. I gotta tell you, after Chris and his friends made up and they started a detective agency together through yet another musical montage, I'm pretty shocked that nobody at any point bothered to fill Chris in on what finally made Hardcourt and Bordeaux turn on Argus. That they were going to use a prison planet for metahumans. Like, I can understand that Chris maybe wouldn't ask, you would think he would ask, but Chris is kind of dumb, as they've established. But like, what finally made you guys leave Argus? But how could they not even tell him? Like, even just in the context of like work gossip, like how to go with my dad's multi-dimensional doorway. Oh my God, let me tell you. And they think they would have mentioned that. So how is Chris totally unaware of what's going on when he's kidnapped, Ice style, more on that in a moment, but brought to Argus and shoved through a doorway? And he's like, what's happening? What are you guys doing? You're like, Chris, what does it look like they're doing? I mean, I could understand maybe that he just didn't want to believe it, but John Cena, unfortunately, isn't that good of an actor. So, speaking of the obvious Ice commentary, it would be interesting to see James Gunn explore that further. But considering how he skimmed over Earth X, despite having set that up beautifully, I don't have high hopes. Like, they're saying it's a prison planet to get rid of metahumans, but what if it's humans just don't want metahumans around? Because they feel they're, it could really be an excellent metaphor. But again, I think, what was he saying, about alternate Earth Augie not willing to take a stand? Sounds similar to Gunn, coming up with brilliant real world commentary, but then dropping it for inappropriate jokes in a mixtape. That's kind of like James Gunn's, that should be like, that's just the Jeopardy answer. Inappropriate jokes in a mixtape. Who is James Gunn? All right. So also, It was driving me crazy that they kept calling Salvation a planet. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's an alternate universe or dimension because that's going with the doorways. And it seems like just another dimension or like a variation on Earth. I mean, they have those monsters in the background we see at the very, very end. But in no way did it seem to say that it was another planet. You know why they're calling it a planet? Because it was a planet in the comics. Sure enough, used as a prison by Checkmate in a story that became a spin-off title from the Checkmate comic called Salvation Run. And the fact that nobody really read that comic when it came out, nor remembers it, even though it's relatively recent, should have been a pretty big red flag for Gunn when he decided to adapt it. You're like, what? That actually, by the way, in the comic looked like an alien planet. But because Peacemaker has absolutely no budget, here it's just a field. And James, it's kind of hard to get excited about a field. It's not even a different looking field than the rest of the show. They were like, what if we just walk over there and turn the camera over there? You're like, you couldn't even have driven to or flown to some place that looks a little different? It was really tough. Also, if they had just thrown a couple of other D-list metahumans out there with Peacemaker, right? Like, couldn't they? I mean, I guess it's the cruelty of making him be there alone, but he's not going to be there alone. By the way, oh yeah, side note, this is just Australia. That's what they did. Australia was a prison island continent back in the day for the UK. That's how Australia was formed. And that would be interesting as well. What if you send a bunch of metahumans to Salvation and they didn't fight each other and set up their own society? Wouldn't that be interesting? And then you would go through there and be like, you guys suffering? And they're like, no, it's actually really great here. We've made a utopia. And then Earth would be like, well, we want it. That would be interesting commentary as well. But, you know, I think James Gunn is quickly establishing, again, a track record of just, you know, having, and to his credit, setting up great ideas, but to borrow the metaphor, not walking through the door. But yeah, if there had been some other people, other superhumans that Chris was like part of like this first wave and, you know, and Rick Flag Sr. just threw Peacemaker in there, and he could have. Peacemaker was out on bail, but, you know, just say, we're going to hold you on Salvation until your court date. Oh, we can't find you. I mean, there was no reason to have to come up with this, oh, Chris volunteered to explore the planet. Like, he's like a known criminal, you know, like, I think that there would be little pushback on putting him there. So yeah, like, I think that if this episode had ended with like the rumors of like Booster Gold and someone else, I don't know, just other D-listers standing next to Peacemaker, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. You know, as the episode unfolded and they introduced having a prison planet here in the DCU, I thought to myself, well, at least Gunn beat Marvel to the punch on this one because Marvel hasn't done Mr. Fantastic's Negative Zone prison storyline, where, you know, there's a questionable morality to whether or not they should go down that whole path. But then I was like, oh, but wait a minute. They actually did do this in Marvel already in the movie and TV space with The Void from Loki and then Deadpool and Wolverine. And in fact, in Deadpool and Wolverine, and to some degree even in Loki, you already had ragtag heroes and, you know, low-level villains team up out of necessity to try and survive in this barren landscape. And The Void was a movie-level place, I have to say, as opposed to this like really cheap-looking Salvation planet. And also, considering how cheap the Salvation planet, prison planet looks, why isn't it Peacemaker season 3, right? I mean, I have some concern they're going to spin it off into a whole new show. And that's exactly the problem over at Marvel. They keep restarting new seasons or new shows instead of new seasons, and it hurts them in the ratings. And I said this last week that I thought that Gunn was, you know, very surprisingly and alarmingly making a lot of the same mistakes that Marvel has been making in the streaming space. And I think that this just is more examples of that. And also, he's presenting deeply low-budget versions of deep cuts from the comics, which is certainly an interesting strategy when trying to capture a mass market audience of non-comic book readers. Like, I don't think a single comic book reader would be like, oh my gosh, we're doing the Salvation Run storyline? Dude, you got to go back and read that. You're like, well, I mean, I got to go back and read it because I got to see, obviously, Gunn's going to pull some stuff from there. But, you certainly, it wasn't a great, I think I read a couple of issues, but I think, to be honest with you, I believe I dropped it because it was not good. And Sasha Bordeaux is the cyborg who only once used her cyborg capabilities. It's like freaking Gamora all over again. James Gunn has spent more of an effort hooking her up with Rick Flag Sr., which is also odd. And instead of, again, making her a cyborg. And here's something else that really bothered me from the interview that he gave this morning. Gunn said that to him, Sasha Bordeaux is not really connected to Batman because he only knows the character from the time that he read her in the Checkmate comic, which is where she wound up. She started out as a Batman character, really interesting storyline, and then eventually, after their really bad breakup, she was badly injured, became a cyborg, joined Checkmate, and has gone on a very interesting path. In some ways, Sasha Bordeaux really is a little bit like Hardcourt because she has more character development. So it would be like if Hardcourt became part cyborg, that kind of character development. And then someone would come along and say, once Hardcourt has become a cyborg, only then did she really come on my radar and interest me. So that's where we're going to start her story. And I think rightfully so, the rest of us would be like, but what about the first part of her story? You can't just dismiss that. And that's a big concern about James Gunn going forward. Like, he's only adapting his view of the comics, like some mega fan who becomes a comics god, instead of a responsible executive who's trying to be respectful and honor the experiences of all different types of comic book fans, right? Like, I know Sasha Bordeaux based on her time from Batman, because that's where the character was introduced, and I've been reading her from the very beginning of her origin. And that Gunn would just throw all that out. And it's from Greg Rucka, no less. This is a great comic book writer. It was a great storyline. And that Gunn would just throw it out and dismiss it simply because it's not his Sasha Bordeaux that he remembers as a fan. Like, go back and read the comic. It's fine that you missed it when it came out, but now that you're the head of DC Studios, go check it out. But he didn't. And that to me is not only really insulting, but really alarming. Now, speaking of comics, I've also read the Checkmate comics. Have I read more comics than James Gunn? I don't think I have, but that's crazy. I think I probably read more current comics than James Gunn. But in the comics, Checkmate is an off-the-books multinational spy organization with Amanda Waller and Maxwell Lord both heavily involved. And let me tell you, they ended up being about as evil as Argus. And they had a much better and bigger budget and offices. It was not a private detective agency with a very public sign at an office park. And while I accurately predicted that the group would use Vigilante's blood money to fund a new team, I'm not quite sure how effective they're going to be with no superpowered members. I guess Peacemaker's a little juiced, and then also no government connections. Like, what the heck was on Vigilante and Flurry's screens, right? I think that Ads has a little bit of access maybe still, but I don't know if she has enough to effectively run an organization, especially if they're hoping to combat Argus. You know what it felt more like? Again, speaking of comics, it reminded me of X Factor Investigations. I believe Peter David wrote that. I think R.I.P. Peter David. But anyway, that was run by Jamie Madrox over in Marvel Comics. And let me tell you, that was a great freaking comic. Way better, in fact, than Checkmate or that was like as good as like Gotham Central, but like more fun because it had superpowered characters on the team. So they were a little bit more effective. But I don't understand why you would drag Checkmate and Sasha Bordeaux into this storyline when it's coming across as totally not comics accurate. Like, just make them form their own team that has that. Like, why use it's clearly Checkmate in name only. And as a comic book fan, that just really annoys me. Also, no offense to this group, but they're not like chess level kind of people. That implies like serious intellect and elegance. It's like, dude, you guys are not chess masters. Come on, let's just be honest here. I will say, though, that I was very happy to see that Flurry and Judo Master had left Argus to join the gang, and that made me very happy. I was like, I'm glad you took those guys with you. So on that note, let's talk about the character development in the season finale, because I agree that was quite well done. I think the chemistry between John Cena and Jennifer Holland is off the charts, but it makes their scenes a little weird to know that James Gunn not only wrote their scenes, but is right off camera directing them. You're like, this is so weird. But and I'm as surprised as anyone to say this, by the end of the season, Holland's Hardcourt has become one of my favorite characters. And I can't believe I'm saying this, an important building block in the DCU. I remember being so upset when she showed up at the end of Black Adam, being like, God, get out of here, this is ridiculous. But I gotta tell you now, I'd actually be somewhat happy to see her. I can't believe it. I still think it's weird that no one else will hire her outside of her husband. But she kind of like is an operative representing humanity in the midst of all these superheroes. Not only, I think, a bit like Agent Coulson in the early days of the MCU, but I really do feel she's kind of like the Sacha Bordeaux of this story. And they don't even need Sacha Bordeaux. What has Sacha Bordeaux really contributed here that Hardcourt couldn't have done herself? Just take the Sacha Bordeaux elements, give them to Hardcourt, and make her character even more interesting. Although it was nice to see the ladies teaming up and working together. That was very nice. I don't know why we couldn't hear what they had to say. Again, James Gunn is a writer. Write some dialogue for them, but whatever. I also think that Hardcourt handled herself really well going through those portals. And I thought she handled herself well with the team, too. I mean, Fleury, that crazy story he was telling, which was like classic James Gunn at this point. But I thought that Hardcourt, I thought she handled the situation as best she could in that work environment. I thought her jokes were good, and I thought it was really well done. And darn it, if I still don't like Economos as well. I think he brings up some really good points in the group and clearly knows what he's doing when he's in his element. And I appreciated that ads called him out as being a coward in the field. And I think acknowledging it helps me to accept that quality about Economos and him overall. I'm like, as long as we're acknowledging it and not pretending that it's not a problem. But I thought he was really good this episode. I thought he was great. And the Eagly moment, I mean, that was pretty beautiful. I also like ads a lot, and I feel like she and Chris are Gunn's version of Storm and Cyclops, the real leaders of the team. She manipulated Vigilante beautifully. And I appreciated her raw emotional honesty this episode, but I wish she got to have as much fun as the other characters. But the glaring issue with her character going forward is that she's not training with her mother. Gunn claims that he has a great relationship with Viola Davis, so where the heck is she? I know Ads feels that her mother is evil, but she's also following in her mother's footsteps. And Ads is smart. Evil or not, she knows that she can learn a lot from her mother and that she can get a lot from her mother just through connections alone. So it's odd that Ads isn't trying to capitalize on that. Like, look what she said to Adrian about using the blood money to do something good. Why not have that same perspective of utilizing her evil mother to do some good? As for Adrian, I continue to go back and forth on Adrian. He's very charming and effective sometimes, but he's even dumber than Chris. And I can't get over how mean he is to his mom. And not only does that itself bother me, but it really irks me that this is an ongoing theme in a lot of James Gunn's work. His just complete disrespect and mistreatment of mother characters. It just doesn't sit right to me, and it's so bizarre. John Cena, fantastic. And I genuinely like to see Chris again, but I hope he gets a new costume. I would love for him to fashion a new costume over on the Salvation planet. And I gotta be honest with you, while Rick Flag Sr. has clearly crossed a line, considering that his son was murdered, I understand where he's coming from and that he didn't kill Chris. So I think it's hard to find fault in what he did here. I mean, it's like, Chris had to pay the piper at some point for what he did. And I mean, for someone like the father of the man he killed, I don't think he'll ever be able to pay that debt. And that's going to be, something to think about when you go around murdering people. Although Rick Flag Sr. did get a lot of Argus agents killed in another weird montage. Too many montages this episode and way too much music, even for Gunn. It was nuts. Finally, another concern that I have is that with as much as I enjoyed Gunn's Superman, his DC is starting to now feel very, very small, especially since Gunn insisted on tying this season of Peacemaker directly to Superman. I think he would have been much better served if he just allowed Peacemaker to stay its own small thing. Maybe his ego couldn't let him, but we'll see if it ever gets on the Nielsen charts. It still isn't on the Nielsen charts that came out yesterday for the fourth week of the show. Marvel is hoping to fix their problem of seeming small. They have the same issue right now with mega event Avengers Doomsday next Christmas. But what is Gunn going to do? I don't know if Supergirl or Clayface are going to solve this issue. Will Man of Tomorrow feel bigger? Or will it just feel like every other James Gunn project? It's a real concern. So again, what is your confidence level in Gunn right now on a 1 to 10? And has it gone up or down or stayed the same after seeing this finale? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.